And we want to get right to some breaking news out of Pawtucket this noontime. Police are investigating an early morning homicide. Authorities tell us a young man was found shot and he later died from his wounds this morning. Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell is working this story live now with the breaking details from the Blackstone Valley Mobile Newsroom.
Police just confirmed the victim's name is Ryan Almeida. He was 21 years old. Police say he had addresses in both Providence and Pawtucket. Now take a look at some of the video we shot just a short time ago. This was the scene a few hours ago at the Gallego Court Complex in Pawtucket. Police believe Almeida was shot outside of this building around 5 o'clock this morning. They say it appears he was shot once in the stomach. He was still alive when police and rescue crews got to him, but he died at Rhode Island Hospital. Police say at this point they don't have any suspects and they don't have any motives.
We don't have anything to suggest anything at this point. It's much too early, and we will let the science dictate, what occurred, as well as our interviews that we're in the process of conducting.
Now, of course, if you have any information about this case, Pawtucket police want to hear from you. Give them a call, and we will have all of the latest on this story coming up on Eyewitness News at 5 and 6. For now, live in Pawtucket with the Blackstone Valley Mobile Newsroom, Susan Campbell, Eyewitness News.
Ryan Almeida. Obituary: Almeida, Ryan E. age 21, died unexpectedly on December 24, 2013. Born in Providence, he was the beloved son of Vera L. Almeida of Pawtucket. He is survived by his brother Terrence Fisher of Pawtucket. He was the grandson of Antonio and Arcangela Nevis Almeida of Providence. He is survived by his godson Xavier Smith of Providence, many aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and his girlfriend Tempest Rebello. His funeral will begin on Saturday at 8:45 a.m. from the Rebello Funeral Home and Crematory, 901 Broadway, East Providence. RIA Mass of Christian burial will follow at 10 a.m. in Holy Name of Jesus Church, 99 Camp Street, Providence. Burial will be in Gate of Heaven Cemetery. Calling hours will be today.
This hour in the murder of a 21-year-old found dead this morning in Pawtucket just feet from his mother's front doorstep. NBC 10's Parker Gavigan has a tragic story this Christmas Eve. Parker?
Hey, Barbara. Yeah, real tragic story right before the holiday. Police now busy putting leads and evidence together to try and solve Pawtucket's 5th murder of the year. The sidewalk and grass next to Building 90 at the Gallego Court Housing Project is a murder scene Tuesday morning. A burning candle marks the spot where 21-year-old Ryan Almeida was found with what appeared to be a single gunshot wound to the stomach. He later died at Rhode Island Hospital.
Our crime scene technicians are combing the area looking for any evidence that could help us in our investigation. We are also conducting interviews with any witnesses or people who were with the victim up until his death.
Family members of the victim didn't want to say much about Ryan's death. Neighbors, though, heard the early morning gunfire.
I hear around 3 shots or 4, around 5 o'clock in the morning.
I was just awake, and all of a sudden there was just 5 gunshots.
Crime tape is piled up in a nearby dumpster next to Christmas party trash. A somber reminder that the holiday has been completely upended for one family.
And it's sad that the boy is dead on Christmas Eve, even if it wasn't Christmas Eve. His mother, for number one, didn't deserve that. Right at her door. Somebody knows something, and nobody's not saying nothing. And it needs to stop. I know when they're gonna stop. I don't know when this is gonna stop. But this is ridiculous, real ridiculous.
Yeah, and police tell us they've had no contact with Almeida over the years. There are cameras all over the complex and one directly overhead where he was found. Detectives taking a close look at that footage to see if there are any clues. That's the latest. Live from the newsroom tonight, I'm Parker Gavigan, NBC 10 News.
Pawtucket police seek motive in killing of Ryan Almeida. Pawtucket, RI. The sun was yet to rise on Christmas Eve morning when Ryan Almeida got a ride back to his mother's apartment in the Gallego Court Public Housing Complex. It was around 5 a.m. when he walked into her apartment at Building 90. Heading back out minutes afterward, in the dark, a gunman was waiting. Almeida was a few feet from his mother's doorstep when someone shot him. Vera Almeida heard the gunfire and ran out to her wounded son, said the police. Someone called 911. Almeida died that morning at Rhode Island Hospital, leaving investigators with questions about who targeted the 21-year-old man and why. His family told the police that Almeida didn't have any problems with anyone. Detective Sergeant Paul Brandley said Wednesday. The detectives were interviewing numerous people and trying to reconstruct where Almeida had spent his last hours and with whom. Brandley said, Almeida, who some called Moondo, had strong ties on Providence's east side. Street workers and victims advocates with the Institute for the Study and Practice of Nonviolence were working with his family and friends, said Tenny Gross, the Institute's executive director. Brandley declined to answer questions about who drove Almeida to Gallego Court Tuesday morning, where they were coming from, or where they were headed. It's not immediately known how the gunman entered and left Gallego Court. Usually, there's a security guard at the gate checking those who drive into the housing complex and surveillance cameras mounted on the buildings, including one positioned over the walkway where Almeida was shot. But there was no security guard posted at the entrance when Almeida was shot. Brandley declined comment on what the surveillance cameras captured, but said the police were reviewing the videos. The police are asking for help in solving Almeida's homicide, the fifth in the city this year.
5 tonight, Pawtucket police are investigating their 5th homicide of the year. We first told you about it on Eyewitness News at noon. A young man is dead after bullets ring out in one Rhode Island city, and tonight, police are searching for his killer. Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell is live in Pawtucket from the Blackstone Valley Mobile Newsroom with the new developments tonight.
Police tell me the victim's name is Ryan Almeida. He was 21 years old. Early Christmas Eve morning, gunshots rang out outside of this building at the Gallego Court complex in Pawtucket. The shots were so loud they woke up Norma Romero.
I hear around 3 shots or 4, around 5 o'clock in the morning.
Police tell Eyewitness News at least one bullet hit Ryan Almeida in the stomach. The 21-year-old was still alive when police and rescue crews got to the scene, but Almeida died soon after at Rhode Island Hospital.
And it's sad that the boy is dead on Christmas Eve, even if it wasn't Christmas Eve late. His mother, for number one, didn't deserve that. You know, right at her door. You know, somebody knows something, and nobody's not saying nothing. And you know, it needs to stop. It really needs to stop. The violence needs to stop.
Now police are trying to figure out who killed him and what the motive was.
We don't have anything to suggest anything at this point. It's much too early, and we will let the science dictate, you know, what occurred, as well as our interviews that we're in the process of conducting.
This is Pawtucket's 5th homicide of the year. Police tell me Ryan Almeida had addresses in both Providence and Pawtucket. Of course, if you have any information about this case, Pawtucket police are asking that you give them a call. And coming up new at 6, a neighbor tells us how the victim's family is coping with their loss. Live in Pawtucket with the Blackstone Valley Mobile Newsroom, Susan Campbell, Eyewitness News.
Providence. Pawtucket police search for connections in murders of 2 men. Providence. RI. The police in Providence and Pawtucket are investigating whether there is any connection between the murders of 2 men from the East Side, who were killed a month apart. Nelson Sanchez, known to friends as Vamp, was fatally shot Friday night when a vehicle pulled alongside his car at a traffic light on Atwells Avenue and Putnam Street in Providence. His friend Sirwa Wagbe sped to the public safety complex for help. Although Sanchez had survived being shot several times before, he succumbed this time. At age 24, Ryan Almeida, 21, nicknamed Moondo, was murdered early Christmas Eve after he stopped into his mother's apartment at Gallego Court in Pawtucket, and walked out to find a gunman waiting. Both men were in the same tight circle of friends in the Mount Hope section of the East Side. The police say that Sanchez was also associated with a street gang that's feuding with other neighborhoods, including the Chad Brown housing development. Detectives were looking at whether Sanchez's murder was connected to the shooting of a 16-year-old boy walking through Chad Brown early Friday afternoon, said Providence Police Maj David Lapidin. Both Lapidin and Pawtucket Police Maj Arthur Martins confirmed their detectives were looking at connections, but they declined further comment on the investigations. Sanchez was involved in gun violence since he was a teenager. He'd been shot at least twice before he turned 18. And later stabbed by someone he wouldn't identify. According to police reports, he got caught selling crack cocaine out of his bedroom, was charged with beating and robbing a stranger for his cell phone, and served time for a shootout on the South Side. The Institute for the Study and Practice of Nonviolence had tried for years to reach Sanchez. Tenny Gross, the Institute's executive director, said that street worker David J. Cartagena had been working closely with Sanchez when he was a teenager. At the time, the street workers were busy mediating flare-ups of violence between street gangs on the East Side and at Chad Brown. Cartagena, a former member of the almighty Latin King Nation youth gang with prison stays behind him, was especially talented at connecting with the gangs and combating violence. Sanchez was one of the young people he was concerned about, Gross said, but David felt strongly that a relationship would make a difference. But Cartagena was killed in a traffic accident in 2009. Another street worker tried keeping up contact with Sanchez later, but by June 2011, Sanchez was accused of a shooting in the South Side. Police responding to the scene at Public and Burnside Streets arrived just in time to hear gunshots and see a man jumping into a waiting car. The vehicle eluded the police, speeding through red lights and traveling the wrong way on one-way streets. On its way back to the East Side, a 16-year-old boy later stumbled into the hospital with a gunshot wound in his leg. The police soon identified Sanchez as the gunman. He pleaded no contest in February 2012 to gun charges, was sentenced to 8 years with 18 months to serve, and was eventually released. By September, he was on a street corner in the Valley neighborhood, where the police found him standing with 2 other men associated with street gangs. As the officers approached, one of the men next to Sanchez tossed a loaded .45 caliber handgun under a car. As the police arrested the man with the gun, Sanchez and his other friend were released. For a few more months, the East Side remained quiet, and then winter arrived. The Providence shooting, first homicide of 2014. The victim has been identified as Nelson Sanchez, 24, of Providence. According to police, the victim was shot while sitting in the passenger seat of a car at the intersection of Atwells Avenue and Putnam Street. Major David Lapidin of the Providence Police Department told NBC 10 that Sanchez was driven from the scene of the shooting to the Providence Police Station and dropped off around 8:50 p.m. He was transported to Rhode Island Hospital, where he died just after 9 p.m. Police have identified the driver of the vehicle as Sirwa Wagbe, 23, and according to police, Wagbe was driving the vehicle when another car pulled up alongside it and opened fire, fatally wounding the passenger Sanchez. According to Major Lapidin, the investigation is ongoing at this time, and police are currently investigating any possible connection between this shooting and the shooting on March Street that happened earlier on Friday. That shooting injured 16-year-old Michael Rodriguez as he walked by the neighborhood recreation center.
First tonight, a suspect is behind bars here in Rhode Island in connection with a Christmas Eve killing. We told you about the murder arraignment on Eyewitness News at noon, and since then, we've gotten our hands on the court documents that reveal more details about the investigation. Eyewitness News reporter Susan Campbell joins us now live from Providence District Court with more on what she's uncovered.
Mike, those court documents show several people are accused of being involved in this murder. We know 2 have been arrested, and police say this investigation is not over.
Yeah, I did, but I don't know where it is.
An accused killer handcuffed and staring straight ahead, arraigned on murder and conspiracy charges. Police say they tracked down Daquan Watts in Maine earlier this week and brought the 20-year-old back to Rhode Island Wednesday afternoon to face charges for the shooting death of Ryan Almeida, a shooting that happened at the Gallego Court Complex in Pawtucket on Christmas Eve.
This defendant admitted essentially his participation in the conspiracy to commit murder.
We went to Watts' last known address. The man who answered the door said he hadn't seen Watts in a while, but says he's surprised to learn that Watts is accused of murder.
He don't seem like that type of kid.
Police tell us they also arrested a 17-year-old boy who's been charged with murder and conspiracy. According to court documents, the boy admitted to driving the vehicle to the murder. He told police Watts and another man were out of the car for about 5 minutes. Then they returned to the car out of breath and later told him that Watts shot Almeida. Police tell us surveillance cameras near the crime scene helped them crack the case.
That was instrumental in us being able to identify the vehicle, and once we had that vehicle identified, it started to move rather quickly.
Police tell us there may be more arrests. Watts is being held without bail. Coming up new at 6, police tell us about a possible motive for murder. Live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom, Susan Campbell, Eyewitness News.
Police. Victim in Pawtucket Christmas Eve murder was shot in retaliation. Providence. RI. The Pawtucket police have arrested a 20-year-old man in Lewiston, Maine, for the Christmas Eve murder of Ryan Almeida, who was gunned down at the Gallego Court housing complex. The suspect, Daquan Watts, was arraigned on a charge of first-degree murder and conspiracy Thursday morning in Providence District Court. He did not enter a plea, as is customary at district court arraignments. According to a Pawtucket police affidavit signed by Detective Dante Rossetti, Almeida was fatally shot at 4:52 a.m. outside an apartment in the housing project. Rescue and police found him lying on the ground, and he was pronounced dead at Rhode Island Hospital. The affidavit states that Rossetti and his partner, Detective David Silva, interviewed 2 witnesses who were seated in a running vehicle outside the apartment where Almeida was killed. They said they saw Almeida emerge from his apartment and saw two men wearing hooded sweatshirts approach him. Several shots were fired, the witnesses told police, and the gunman fled on foot, the affidavit states. Others in the apartment complex also heard gunshots, the police said. At the time, Almeida was visiting his mother, who lives in Gallego Court. Detectives believe that the suspect was specifically targeted and the suspects had prior knowledge that the victim was at his mother's apartment just prior to the murder, Rossity wrote in the affidavit. Detectives reviewed footage from a surveillance video and learned that a white Toyota Solara drove into the apartment complex and parked behind Almeida's car. Investigators believed that the car, owned by Nathaniel Robinson of Cranston, drove the shooters to Gallego Court. Pawtucket police records also revealed that the same car was stopped in Pawtucket a few weeks before the murder. Robinson told police that he and another man, a 17-year-old juvenile, stayed at the Comfort Inn in Pawtucket between December 23 and December 25. The juvenile, according to the affidavit, told the police that he drove Watts and another man to Gallego Court on Christmas Eve morning. He said they wore hoodies and planned on shooting Almeida, the affidavit states. Watts and the other man returned to the car out of breath and later told the driver that Watts had shot Almeida, states the affidavit, and the murder weapon was allegedly discarded by a man called Heavy. The shooting occurred out of retaliation for another shooting, the police wrote in the affidavit. On Wednesday, the Pawtucket police traveled to Maine and arrested Watts. He was returned to Rhode Island for his arraignment this morning on the murder, according to a Pawtucket police press release. A 17-year-old male was also arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. The teenager was taken into custody last Friday. His name has not been released because he is a juvenile. District Court Magistrate Joseph P. Ippolito Jr. ordered Watts held Thursday and referred him to a public defender. His bail hearing is scheduled for April 24.
Murdering a Pawtucket man the day before Christmas was in court today. Good evening, I'm Patrice Wood.
And I'm Dan Janik. The suspect brought back from Maine to face some charges, and police tell NBC 10's Susie Steimel they have him admitting his involvement in the shooting.
It's the first time we're seeing the face of Daquan Watts, one of the men accused of capital murder on Christmas Eve morning in Pawtucket. Police already charged a 17-year-old male with murder and conspiracy, but it took them 3 months to find Watts. Sources close to the investigation tell NBC 10 Watts has been hiding in Maine since the murder. That's where U.S. Marshals found him Tuesday.
I was just awake, and all of a sudden there was just 5 gunshots.
People in the Gallego Court projects in Pawtucket woke up Christmas Eve morning to find 21-year-old Ryan Almeida had been murdered. We've since learned Watts and Almeida knew each other and had been at odds for some time. Nearly 24 of Watts' friends and family came to court to defend his innocence, but police allege Watts admitted he was there that morning.
This defendant admitted essentially his participation in the conspiracy to commit murder, that he knew that they were going to the manor to shoot someone, and he admitted that he was one of the individuals that got out of the car and approached the victim prior to the shooting.
Court documents show they have it on camera that 2 men are seen shooting Almeida at his mother's apartment. Watts is being held without bail as his case is referred to Superior Court. His next court date is April 24th. In Providence, Susie Steimel, NBC 10 News.
Police charge third man in Pawtucket killing. Authorities have arrested a third man in connection with a Christmas Eve killing in Pawtucket. Police said 21-year-old Tyron Wilcox was arraigned Friday in Providence District Court and charged with murder and conspiracy. He was ordered held without bail. Authorities said 20-year-old Daquan Watts shot 21-year-old Ryan Almeida in the stomach outside at an apartment complex in Pawtucket. Almeida was lying on his mother's doorstep on the morning of December 24th. He was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Authorities tracked down Watts in Lewiston, Maine on Wednesday and took him back to Rhode Island. He's charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy.
A third suspect is facing charges tonight in connection with a Christmas Eve killing. 21-year-old Tyrone Wilcox was arrested yesterday and charged with murder and conspiracy. Only our cameras were rolling inside court today as the suspect faced a judge. Eyewitness News reporter Mara Kennedy has the video you'll see only on Eyewitness News.
Pawtucket police have arrested and charged a third suspect in that Christmas Eve murder, and now we're hearing 4 months after the homicide happened.
too.
In video you'll only see on Eyewitness News, a murder suspect appears in court for the first time since a 21-year-old was shot and killed in Pawtucket on Christmas Eve. 21-year-old Tyron Wilcox is charged with the conspiracy and murder of Ryan Almeida.
Mr. Wilcox turned himself in yesterday to our department. He was aware that we were seeking him, and he did turn himself in. And he was placed into custody yesterday and brought before the court this afternoon, where he was held without bail after arraignment.
Wilcox is the third suspect charged in this crime. Earlier this week, Eyewitness News reported 20-year-old Daquan Watts was also charged with murder and conspiracy. Court documents say the first murder suspect, a 17-year-old boy, admitted to driving the vehicle in the murder. Investigators tell us they're still looking for some people, and more arrests could come.
Well, there's the potential that it could be gang-related, but we're not prepared to announce a motive at this point, though.
Police say suspects were captured on surveillance video, a key piece of evidence in identifying the suspect.
New details on a Christmas Eve killing in Pawtucket. One of the suspects, 17-year-old Jose Lopez, has been waived out of family court and will now be tried as an adult on murder and conspiracy charges. 21-year-old Ryan Almeida was shot and killed this past December. According to court documents, Lopez admitted to driving the vehicle involved in the murder. He's due in court in 2 weeks for a bail hearing.
Providence teen to be tried as an adult in Pawtucket murder. Providence. A city teenager has been waived out of family court and he will be tried as an adult for his alleged role in the fatal shooting of Ryan Almeida outside his mother's Pawtucket apartment on Christmas Eve. Jose Lopez, 17, of Providence, was arraigned on Monday in district court and charged with murder and conspiracy. He was ordered held without bail and was transferred from the state training school for juveniles to the adult correctional institutions. He is the third man charged in connection with the murder. Tyron Wilcox, 21, and Daquan Watts, 20, both of Providence, were arrested last month and charged with murder and conspiracy. An affidavit filed with the court by the Pawtucket police alleged that the two men gunned Almeida down at 4:52 a.m. on Christmas Eve at the Gallego Court housing project. The police said the fatal shooting was in retaliation for an earlier shooting. Wilcox fled to Lewiston, Maine, where he was arrested on April 11 and returned to Rhode Island. Wilcox and Watts also are being held without bail at the ACI. Lopez was the first of the three to be arrested early last month. Investigators alleged that he was driving the car, a white Toyota Solara, that delivered Wilcox and Watts to the scene of the murder. The Pawtucket Fire Department rescue and police found Almeida lying on the ground and he was pronounced dead at Rhode Island Hospital. The affidavit states that Pawtucket detectives Dante Rossity and David Silva interviewed two witnesses who were seated in a running vehicle outside the apartment where Almeida was shot and killed. They said they saw Almeida emerge from his mother's apartment and saw two men wearing hooded sweatshirts approach him. Several shots were fired, the witnesses told the police, and the gunman fled on foot. The affidavit states, detectives believe that the suspect was specifically targeted and the suspects had prior knowledge that the victim was at his mother's apartment just prior to the murder.
From the NBC 10 I team, charged as an adult. A Providence teenager is facing a murder charge for a Christmas Eve shooting in Pawtucket. NBC 10's Katie Davis is live in the newsroom with new details the I team broke. Katie?
Patrice, Jose Lopez was just 16 years old in December, but in these court documents obtained by the I-Team, Pawtucket police say he pulled the trigger, killing 21-year-old Ryan Almeida just outside his mother's apartment. Burning candle marked the spot where 21-year-old Ryan Almeida was found shot to death early Christmas Eve. Crime scene tape piled up next to Christmas party trash inside the Gallego Court housing project. A 4-month investigation by Pawtucket police now has 4 suspects charged in a case, including 17-year-old Jose Giovanni Lopez, known as Gio. The Providence boy was just 16 on Christmas Eve, but in this search warrant affidavit obtained by the I-Team, Pawtucket police say he was the shooter. Quote, Gio produced the gun. He and Daquan Watts went into the manor to shoot Almeida. They walked away with hoodies on and returned a short time later. Watts said he got him, referring to Lopez shooting Almeida. Lopez was originally charged in juvenile court, but his case was waived to district court Monday. He's now charged as an adult with murder and conspiracy. 3 other suspects face the same charges. Police say 20-year-old Daquan Watts fled from Providence to Maine after the murder. That's where detectives picked him up last month. Also arrested Tyrone Wilcox of Pawtucket and Jason Gonzalez of Providence, known as Heavy. According to the affidavit, police believe it was Gonzalez who got rid of the gun after the murder. And Jose Lopez, the 17-year-old, is due back in district court May 19th. Tonight, he is being held at the ACI without bail. Live in the newsroom, Katie Davis, NBC 10 News.
2 face more charges in Christmas Eve murder. A Providence grand jury today indicted Jose Lopez and Daquan Watts with more charges in the Christmas Eve murder of Ryan Almeida in Pawtucket. Lopez, 17, and Watts, 20, both from Providence, were, along with the previous charge of murder, charged with discharge of a firearm while committing a crime of violence, conspiracy, and carrying a firearm without a license. Prosecutors alleged that Lopez and Watts murdered Ryan Almeida outside his mother's Pawtucket apartment on Christmas Eve. They are scheduled to be arraigned in Providence Superior Court May 30. Man accused of murder released on bail. A man accused of murder in a Pawtucket shooting on Christmas Eve has been released from prison on bail. 21-year-old Tyrone Wilcox was charged in April in connection to the shooting death of Ryan Almeida on Christmas Eve. Wilcox was charged with conspiracy and murder. He was the 3rd suspect accused in the crime. On May 24, Wilcox posted bail at the prison for $50,000 with surety. He has been ordered to home confinement as the criminal charges proceed. Police say Wilcox, along with Daquan Watts and 17-year-old Jose Lopez, gunned down Almeida early in the morning of December 24 outside his mother's housing complex.
Now we are working, developing news on another murder investigation. Today, the suspect accused of killing a man on Christmas Eve pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Daquan Watts is accused of shooting Ryan Almeida in Pawtucket last year in an act of revenge. Eyewitness News reporter Madeline Wright joins us now live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom.
Mike, the suspect's guilty plea allows him to avoid a trial, but prosecutors say even without the plea, they were prepared to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the suspect was guilty of murder.
Please state your name and date of birth.
Daquan Watts, 11/9.
20-year-old Daquan Watts stood before a Superior Court judge in Providence Friday and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder.
On December 24th of 2013, at approximately 4 a.m., Mr. Watts was picked up at his residence on Hollis Street in Providence by co-conspirators Jason Gonzalez and Jose Lopez.
Prosecutors say the day of the murder, Watts and 2 other men drove around Providence looking for a rival gang member to shoot. They came across 21-year-old Ryan Almeida at the Gallego Court housing complex in Pawtucket, where Almeida lived with his mother. Prosecutors say 17-year-old Jose Lopez pulled the trigger when he saw Almeida leave his apartment.
Lopez fired a .22 caliber revolver at Ryan Almeida. Lopez fired more shots and Mr. Watts ran.
Prosecutors say Almeida died from a bullet wound to the torso and that Watts drove himself and the 2 other men involved in a getaway car. Watts was arrested in Maine months after the shooting. Watts is one of 3 men charged with Almeida's murder. His sentencing is scheduled for January. Live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom, Madeline Wright, Eyewitness News.
Providence man pleads guilty to first-degree murder in Christmas Eve shooting. Providence, R.I. Daquan Watts, 20, of 26 Hollis Street, Providence, pleaded guilty Friday before Superior Court Justice Robert D. Krause to first-degree murder. He also pleaded guilty to discharge of a firearm, death resulting, conspiracy to commit murder, and carrying a pistol without a license. Sentencing is scheduled for January 7, 2015. Had the case proceeded to trial, the state was prepared to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that on December 24, 2013, Watts and Jose Lopez shot Ryan Almeida outside of an apartment complex in Pawtucket. Almeida died as a result of his injuries. 3 men were charged in connection with Almeida's death. Jose Lopez, 17, of Providence, was waived out of family court this spring and will be tried as an adult. Tyrone Wilcox, 21, also of Providence, also was charged with murder and conspiracy. At the time, the police said that the fatal shooting was in retaliation for an earlier shooting. After a 3-week trial, Jose Gio Lopez was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and discharging a firearm while committing a crime of violence in the murder of Ryan Almeida. He is looking at a potential sentence of 2 consecutive life sentences plus 10 years. His co-conspirators, Daquan Watts aka 40 and Jason Gonzalez aka Heavy, both testified against Lopez and have plead guilty to their involvement in Almeida's murder. Watts received a life sentence with no parole and Gonzalez received a sentence of 7 years suspended with 7 years of probation. The investigation was conducted by detectives David Silva and Dante Rossetti.
A teenager will spend the rest of his life in prison for his role in a Christmas Eve murder. Today, a judge ruled that Jose Lopez will serve 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of 22-year-old Ryan Almeida, who was shot to death outside a Pawtucket apartment in December 2013. Prosecutors say this was a gang-related shooting. Last November, 20-year-old Daquan Watts pleaded guilty to pulling the trigger. He's facing life in prison.
Jose Lopez sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the 2013 Christmas Eve murder of Ryan Almeida. On January 30, 2015, a Providence County Superior Court jury found Lopez guilty of murder, discharging a firearm while in the commission of a crime of violence, for which today he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, and conspiracy, or which he was sentenced to 10 years suspended with probation, to run consecutive to the life sentences. At the time of the trial, the jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours following a 12-day trial presided over by Justice Krause. This is another tragic case of a young life cut short by senseless gun violence. On Christmas Eve of 2013, what is usually a time of celebration with family and loved ones, Jose Lopez went driving around with his friends for the sole purpose of finding and shooting at gang rivals, and he accomplished his ruthless goal, brutally murdering Ryan Almeida on his mother's doorstep, said Attorney General Peter F. Kilmartin. Just this week, our community has seen far too many incidents of violence with deadly consequences, and it must end. During the course of the trial, the state proved that in the early morning hours of December 24, 2013, Lopez, Jason Heavy Gonzalez age 19, and Daquan 40 Watts, age 21, all members of the Chad Brown Street Gang, drove in a white Toyota Solara to the east side of Providence with the intent to shoot at gang rivals. They did so based on an ongoing conflict with gang members from the east side of Providence. Once the 3 defendants did not find any gang rivals in this section of Providence, they drove towards the Gallego Court housing development, commonly referred to as the Manor, in Pawtucket. They knew that Ryan Almeida, an alleged East Side gang member, lived and hung out with friends there. Watts drove the Solara to the Manor, with Gonzalez in the front passenger seat and Lopez in the back seat. When they arrived in the Manor, they saw a black Volvo with its lights on parked near the apartment of Almeida's mother. Parked across the street from the Manor, Lopez, armed with a .22 caliber black revolver, and Watts exited the vehicle, pulled the hoods of their sweatshirts up, and walked to the entrance of the Manor. As Almeida exited his mother's apartment, Lopez fired the gun several times, striking him in the torso. As Almeida fell to the ground, Lopez and Watts ran back to the vehicle. Awoken by noise in the house and the sounds of gunfire outside, Vera Almeida opened the front door to find her son on the ground. Almeida told his mother, "Don't come out here, they're still out here." She briefly went back inside to grab a telephone and call E-911. Almeida was transported to Rhode Island Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. During the trial, the jury heard testimony from Jason Gonzalez that, when they arrived on the side street in Pawtucket in the white Solara, Watts stated to him, "Heavy, grab that," referring to a firearm. Lopez replied from the back seat, "No, I wanna do it." Lopez then placed a .22 caliber black revolver in his sweatshirt pocket. Gonzalez stayed inside the car while Watts and Lopez got out. When Watts and Lopez returned to the white Solara, Watts said to Gonzalez, "Gio got him." Lopez stated, "I think I got him." In addition, the jury heard testimony from Daquan Watts that Lopez asked Watts to walk with him into the Manor. Watts and Lopez walked into the Manor to see who was in the black Volvo. They walked on the sidewalk until they reached the back of the 80 and 90 building. They then walked behind the building. When they reached the corner of the building outside of Almeida's apartment, Watts saw Ryan Almeida closing the door. When Almeida turned around, Watts recognized him. Jose Lopez fired at Almeida several times with the .22 caliber black revolver. Watts saw Almeida fall to the ground. Watts ran and Lopez followed behind him. Once back in Providence, the 3 individuals drove Gonzalez back to his house, and Lopez handed the gun to Gonzalez, who put the gun in a safe in his house. Later that morning, upon learning Almeida had died, Watts instructed Gonzalez to get rid of the gun. Gonzalez told Watts he dumped it in a nearby sewer, but in reality Gonzalez sold the gun to an individual named Dame who lived in the Lockwood housing complex in Providence. When Dame inspected the gun in Gonzalez's presence prior to sale of the gun, there were 4 empty shells in the cylinder of the firearm. Jose Lopez testified on his own behalf. In October 2014, Gonzalez pled guilty to carrying a firearm without a license and conspiracy. In November 2015, Watts pled guilty to murder, discharge of a firearm while in the commission of a crime of violence, conspiracy to commit murder, and carrying a pistol without a license. Watts received a life sentence with no parole, and Gonzalez received 7 years suspended and 7 years probation. Assistant Attorney General and Chief of the Juvenile Prosecution Unit John Moreira and Special Assistant Attorney General David Bonzani prosecuted the case on behalf of the Office of Attorney General. The
Supreme Court of Rhode Island has upheld the conviction of a man who murdered a rival gang member. Jose Lopez is serving 2 life sentences for the murder of 21-year-old Ryan Almeida in Pawtucket on Christmas Eve 2013. Lopez claimed he was denied a new trial, that the trial judge overlooked and misconstrued evidence, and that the evidence didn't support the verdicts.
RI judge upholds double life sentence for gang member convicted of killing rival at age 16. A Superior Court judge has struck down a constitutional challenge to a double consecutive life sentence he meted out to a teenage gang member who ambushed a rival on Christmas Eve in 2013. Judge Robert D. Krause rejected Chad Brown gang member Jose Gio Lopez's bid to vacate the consecutive life sentences he is serving for murdering East Side Posse gang member Ryan Almeida outside his mother's apartment at the Gallego Court housing development in Pawtucket. Lopez, now 21, was days from his 17th birthday at the time of his crime. The shooting came as revenge for the murder of Jose Sanchez, who was fatally shot in the Chad Brown housing project 6 months earlier. Lopez argued through his lawyers Jeffrey D. Peckham and Cara J. McGuire that the sentence is illegal, given recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings that eliminated the death penalty for minors and barred mandatory life without parole sentences for juvenile offenders, unless a court finds them to be entirely incorrigible. He asserted that those rulings should be extended to him because his sentence amounts to a de facto term of life without parole. Manifestly, Lopez's parolable sentences are not irrevocable, and, certainly, they do not approach Rhode Island's most severe sentence of life without parole. Krause wrote in the ruling issued last week that extreme sentence was never in play in this case. Lopez was ordered to serve consecutive life sentences for first-degree murder and for discharging a firearm resulting in the death of Ryan Almeida, both of which are parolable. Krause said, "State law dictates that a person convicted of first-degree murder and of discharging a firearm while committing a crime of violence that ends in death be sentenced to consecutive life terms." According to Krause's ruling, Lopez will be eligible for parole at only 47, and, according to life expectancy calibrations, will have another 35 years to live. There is not persuasive reason, other than unpredictable health vicissitudes which can arise at any time in one's life, to conclude that Lopez will be unable to engage in major life activities from several more years if he is released at that age. Krause wrote, "The ruling comes as state lawmakers consider measures that would allow offenders who committed their crimes before age 18 to be considered for parole after 15 years behind bars. At this point, people sentenced to life terms are parole eligible after 20 years. Often, however, juveniles convicted of murders with a gun are sentenced to consecutive life sentences as required by state law, meaning they are not eligible for parole until they've served 30 years in prison." Krause took a dim view of that legislation in the Lopez ruling. Krause, who oversees some of the state's most violent cases in presiding over the gun court, doles out some of the stiffest sentences in the state. Juvenile offenders in Rhode Island who deliberately and with premeditation shoot and kill another person, although sentenced to 2 statutorily mandated consecutive life terms, are nevertheless legislatively entitled to the normal benefits of a parole process which entitles to them to be considered for release after having served 30 years. Krause wrote, "To widen the parole gates beyond what is presently and sensibly afforded, quite apart from doing scant justice to civilized society, would in no way reflect the heretofore clearly stated intention of the General Assembly to enhance the sentences of gang-affiliated crimes, not diminish them." While Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts and 14 other states have passed laws banning life without parole for juveniles, there is no such law in Rhode Island. Lopez is appealing the ruling to the state Supreme Court. State v. Jose Lopez. Justice Goldberg, for the court. This case came before the Supreme Court on October 26, 2016, on appeal by the defendant, Jose Lopez, defendant or Lopez, from judgments of conviction entered in the Superior Court. Following a jury trial, Lopez was convicted of murder in the first degree, discharging a firearm during a crime of violence, and conspiracy to commit murder. Lopez, who was a juvenile at the time of the murder, was acquitted of one count of carrying a firearm without a license. Before this court, Lopez contends that the trial justice erred by denying his motion for a new trial. Specifically, he argues that the trial justice overlooked and misconstrued material evidence and that the weight of the evidence did not support the verdicts in this case in light of the bias and interests of the state's witnesses. For the reasons set forth below, we affirm the judgments of conviction. Facts and travel on Christmas Eve 2013. 21-year-old Ryan Almeida. Almeida was murdered outside his mother's home at the Gallego Court Housing Project, The Manor, in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. The facts and circumstances leading up to this homicide portray a vengeful and violent gang feud between the Chad Brown and the East Side Street gangs. Jason Heavy Gonzalez, Daquan Watts, and Lopez are members of the Chad Brown gang, and the decedent was an alleged member of the rival East Side gang. Although the intense antagonism between the two gangs is deeply rooted, the animosity escalated in June 2013, when Lopez's cousin, Jose Hova Sanchez, was murdered, allegedly by members of the East Side gang. Fatal shooting in Providence's 9th homicide of the year. Providence. Candles now mark the spot where a young man lost his life. Providence police confirmed the identity of 20-year-old Jose Sanchez, who became the city's 9th homicide this year after he was fatally shot around 1:30 Saturday morning. It happened right in front of Vicente Ayala's house. He says the gunfire woke him up and he looked out his window to see the victim lying on the ground. Family members tell me Sanchez was the father of a baby girl, about to turn 1. Friends and loved ones came to the scene throughout the morning to add to the growing memorial. Police told NBC 10 Sanchez, who pleaded no contest to a firearms possession charge last year, had an association with a local street gang and investigators are looking at that as a possible motive, but at this point no suspects in the case. The facts of this case are chilling. In the early morning hours of December 24, 2013, Gonzalez, Watts, and Lopez went for a ride to the east side of Providence. To see if they could see anybody from that side of town. They drove up Pleasant Street, down Camp Street, and down Doyle Avenue, looking for enemies to shoot, to no avail, when Watts suggested that they go to the manor and look for Almeida. After driving past the guard shack at the manor, Watts directed them to the back of the manor, where he knew Almeida lived with his mother. Gonzalez and Watts noticed a black car with its engine running and its lights on. Although the vehicle appeared to be unoccupied, there were 2 occupants in the car: Janelle Lewis, and her boyfriend, Lewis, an eyewitness to the murder, testified at trial. Her testimony corroborated the testimony of Gonzalez and Watts and supported their accounts that Lopez was the shooter. After noticing Lewis's vehicle, the Chad Brown gang proceeded out of the manor and parked on a side street across from the complex. According to both Gonzalez and Watts, Gonzalez got out of the car and asked for the gun, but Lopez objected, declaring that he wanted to do it. Watts and Gonzalez watched as Lopez pulled a gun out of his shoe and put it in the pocket of his gray hooded sweatshirt. Lopez asked Watts to accompany him because Watts knew his way around the manor. Gonzalez remained in the car. Watts and Lopez tightened the hoods of their sweatshirts and proceeded into the manor toward Almeida's apartment. According to Watts, Almeida was coming out of his home when Lopez pulled out the gun, aimed, and fired. Watts heard a total of 5 gunshots. As Almeida fell to the ground, Lopez and Watts ran back to the car where Watts told Gonzalez that it was Almeida who was coming out of the house, and that Lopez had got him. Watts added, "I heard Almeida scream. I think he got hit 5 times. Lopez agreed, stating, "I think I hit him." The gunshots awakened Almeida's mother, who ran to the door and saw her son lying on the ground outside, bleeding from his abdomen. In his final moments, Almeida worried for his mother, stating, "Ma, don't run out here. I think they're still out here." Almeida died of a gunshot wound to the torso. The manner of death was homicide. It was Christmas Eve morning. The defendant testified at trial and contested this version of events. According to Lopez, it was he who was driving the car that evening, a white Toyota Solara that he had borrowed from his friend, Nathaniel Robinson. Robinson. After Lopez picked up Watts, Gonzalez, and Tyron Wilcox, Watts suggested that they drive to the east side to look for rival gang members. Lopez agreed because it was the East Side gang that had killed his cousin, but he stated, "I'm not shooting nobody or nothing." Lopez testified that he did not want to put Robinson's car in a situation. As they were driving to the east side, Wilcox asked to be taken home to his house in the manor to get something. When they reached the manor, Lopez drove past the guard shack, circled around, and exited the complex. He parked across the street, as instructed by Watts. Notably, Lopez claimed that he did not notice a black car with its lights on parked in the back of the manor because he wasn't paying attention. Lopez testified that Watts and Wilcox got out of the Solara, donned their hoodies, and walked toward the manor without speaking a word. Lopez testified that he did not see a gun, and did not know where Watts and Wilcox were going because he wasn't paying attention. When the men returned to the vehicle, about 5 minutes later, Lopez asked, "What the hell? What's going on?" Lopez claimed that neither man responded, but that he saw Watts hand something to Gonzalez. He could not identify the item because he wasn't paying attention. Also, he did not learn of the shooting until the next day, when he watched the news. Lopez averred that he later spoke with Watts, who confirmed that he was the shooter. Although the events leading up to the shooting were disputed by the witnesses at trial, it was uncontested that Lopez was the first member of the group to speak with the police in the aftermath of the shooting. However, defendants' version of the events did not support the facts uncovered by the detectives during their investigation, including the facts disclosed by Lewis, whose physical description of the shooter matched that of Lopez. Lopez was arrested on April 4, 2014, after the detectives secured an arrest warrant based on surveillance images captured by a camera on the guard shack of the manor. The images depict the Toyota Solara entering into the complex in the early morning hours of December 24, 2013. Based on the images, the police traced the vehicle to Lopez. After an initial denial, Lopez eventually admitted that he had been the driver of the Solara, but that Watts was the shooter. Subsequently, the detectives secured warrants for Watts and Wilcox, and then arrested Gonzalez. When Watts and Gonzalez learned that Lopez gave up everybody and pointed the finger at them, the tables turned. Watts and Gonzalez agreed to cooperate with the state and testify against Lopez. At trial, both Watts and Gonzalez declared that Lopez was the shooter. Their testimony and that of the other witnesses for the state convinced the jury of Lopez's guilt. He was convicted of murder, discharging a firearm during a crime of violence, and conspiracy to commit murder. After the trial, justice denied Lopez's motion for a new trial. He was sentenced to 2 mandatory consecutive sentences of life imprisonment for first-degree murder and for discharging a firearm resulting in death. He also was sentenced to a consecutive 10-year term of suspension and probation for conspiracy to commit murder. Lopez filed a timely notice of appeal to this court. He was 18 years old at the time. Standard of review when passing on a motion for a new trial in a criminal case. The trial justice must determine whether the evidence adduced at trial is sufficient for the jury to conclude guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. When making this determination, the trial justice acts as a 13th juror, exercising independent judgment on the credibility of witnesses and on the weight of the evidence. Specifically, the trial justice must 1. Consider the evidence in light of the jury charge, independently assess the credibility of the witnesses and the weight of the evidence, and then determine whether he or she would have reached a result different from that reached by the jury. Quoting her idea, if the trial justice agrees with the jury's verdict. 2. Watts pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, conspiracy, and carrying a firearm without a license. He was sentenced to serve a single life sentence for first-degree murder and 10 years concurrently for conspiracy and carrying a firearm without a license. Gonzalez pleaded guilty to conspiracy and carrying a firearm without a license. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 10 years, 3 years to serve with 7 years suspended and probation. The inquiry is complete and the motion for a new trial should be denied. In cases in which the trial justice has articulated a sufficient rationale for denying a motion for a new trial, the decision will be given great weight. Such a judgment will be disturbed only if the trial justice has overlooked or misconceived material evidence relating to a critical issue or if the justice was otherwise clearly wrong. This court employs a deferential standard of review because a trial justice, being present during all phases of the trial, is in an especially good position to evaluate the facts and to judge the credibility of the witnesses. Analysis. The sole issue before this court is whether the trial justice erred in denying defendant's motion for a new trial. Specifically, we are tasked with considering whether the trial justice overlooked or misconceived material evidence and clearly erred when he credited the testimony of two biased cohorts, Watts and Gonzalez. We perceive no error. After carefully reviewing the record before us, we are satisfied that the trial justice properly weighed the evidence presented at trial and independently assessed the credibility of the witnesses when he concluded that he agreed with the jury's verdict, holding that the trial justice did not err in denying a motion for a new trial where he reviewed the physical evidence presented at trial, independently assessed the credibility of the witnesses, and articulated his reasons for the denial. The trial justice prefaced his reasoning for denying the motion by quoting from this court's decision in State v. Matitol. When a defendant elects to testify, he runs the very real risk that if disbelieved, the trier of fact may conclude that the opposite of his testimony is the truth. As long as there exists some other evidence of the defendant's guilt, disbelief of a defendant's sworn testimony is sufficient to sustain a finding of guilt. A trier of fact is not compelled to accept and believe the self-serving stories of vitally interested defendants. Their evidence may not only be disbelieved, but from the totality of the circumstances, including the manner in which they testify, a contrary conclusion may be properly drawn. We consider this passage befitting for the issue at hand. This case was a straightforward credibility contest between defendant and his co-conspirators, Watts and Gonzalez. The defendant elected to testify, and the jury rejected his testimony, a repudiation that the trial justice found to be not at all surprising. The trial justice assessed defendant's credibility by recounting portions of his testimony, honing in on the myriad of untruths that he offered to the jury. The inconsistencies began with defendant's claim that he was not a member of the Chad Brown gang despite his appearance in Facebook photographs flaunting the iconic Chad Brown C hand sign and his repeated Facebook references to his friends as fellow gang members. The defendant testified that he didn't know there was a gun in the car, even though the nearly identical testimony of Watts and Gonzalez named him as the gunman. The trial justice found that, in further conflict with defendant's apparent ignorance of the gun, is the sad reality of gang life that one never enters into enemy territory without a gun, and that there is no reason to go into enemy territory unless intending to shoot somebody. The trial justice concluded that defendant's testimony, in addition to his disclaimer that he would drive to the east side but not shoot at anyone, was simply not credible. At the very least, defendant knew full well that this car ride was bent on violence and, as well, revenge and retaliation for his cousin's death. The defendant's version of the moments after the shooting, when he stated that Watts and Gonzalez returned to the car and neglected to mention the shooting, also was categorized by the trial justice as simply ridiculous. In contrast to defendant's testimony, the trial justice credited that of Watts and Gonzalez and found, the very least, the evidence demonstrated that all three of them were involved in a conspiracy to commit murder. Gonzalez last saw the gun in Lopez's hands, and Watts said he saw Lopez actually shoot Almeida. The trial justice concluded, based on the evidence adduced at trial, that the jury was warranted in accepting that testimony. We are inclined to agree. When a defendant in a criminal case elects to testify on his own behalf, he can expect rigorous cross-examination from the prosecution that may well serve as the final persuasive factor convincing the jury of his guilt. In the context of a motion for a new trial, this court has articulated that, even if the evidence and the reasonable inferences to be drawn therefrom are so nearly balanced that reasonable individuals could arrive at different results, the new trial motion must be denied. Here, however, the approximately 150 pages of the record devoted to defendant's testimony yields little room for a near balance of the evidence or the potential for reasonable minds to arrive at different results. Rather, after a fair reading of defendant's testimony, any doubt that existed in the minds of the jurors after the testimony of Watts and Gonzalez evaporated, affirming the denial of a motion for a new trial where the defendant's own testimony, when viewed in the context of other highly credible testimony, in all likelihood caused the jury to convict the defendant of involuntary manslaughter. Thus, when the credible testimony of Watts and Gonzalez is considered in light of defendant's inconsistent, self-serving offering, a rational fact finder could fairly find defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, considering the independent evidence adduced at trial in light of the defendant's patently incredible testimony full of inconsistencies and contradictions, to conclude that neither the trial justice nor any rational juror could have entertained any reasonable doubt about the defendant's guilt. Consequently, We are satisfied that the trial justice neither overlooked nor misconceived material evidence, nor was the trial justice otherwise clearly wrong in reaching the same result as the jury. We note that the main thrust of defendant's appeal, that the trial justice should have believed defendant's testimony and not that of the state's witnesses, who he alleges were biased and were driven by motives to lie, is but an attempt to have this court reassess the credibility of the witnesses, an exercise in which we decline to engage, noting that credibility determinations belong in a trial court but not in this court. At the motion for a new trial stage in a criminal prosecution, credibility assessments are exclusively within the province of the trial justice, who is under no obligation to sift through a witness's testimony and discard only those portions that are patently unbelievable. Rather, the trial justice may believe one set of facts and disbelieve the other. The trial justice may accept or reject conflicting testimony and draw all reasonable inferences therefrom. In the case before us, the jury and the trial justice were presented with possibility that defendant may have been framed by his cohorts. Yet, it was their version of the events that was accepted as true and the testimony of defendant was rejected. The defendant points us to discrepancies between Watts's testimony and Gonzalez's testimony in arguing that the two gang members colluded against him. However, the presence of some inconsistencies between or among the statements of a witness or witnesses at different points in time does not ipso facto render the testimony unworthy of belief. Of course, crediting the testimony of Watts and Gonzalez, and rejecting that of defendant, was within the discretion of the trial justice in passing on a motion for a new trial. We defer to that discretion. This court will not act as the arbiter of credibility because that remains a determination that is to the trial justices who experience firsthand the delivery and demeanor of a witness's testimony. The trial justice determined that, based on the evidence at trial, the jury was warranted in finding defendant guilty. The weight of the evidence, namely the independent eyewitness testimony of Lewis, coupled with that of Watts and Gonzalez, clearly established that defendant was the shooter rather than an unsuspecting getaway driver who wasn't paying attention. The trial justice determines that the evidence adduced at trial is sufficient for the jury, as fact finders, to conclude that it proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The motion for a new trial must be denied accordingly. We are satisfied that the trial justice fulfilled his role as the 13th juror by independently weighing the evidence in light of his charge to the jury and assessing the credibility of the witnesses. His conclusion that he agreed with the verdict thus ended his role in the new trial analysis. We decline to disturb that decision. Conclusion: for the reasons stated in this opinion, we affirm the judgments of conviction. The papers in this case shall be remanded to the Superior Court.
We're learning more about the victim of a deadly shooting in the capital city. Police say a 23-year-old man was shot and killed while driving down Donaldson Street this afternoon. Eyewitness News reporter Kim Kalunian has been tracking the story all day. She joins us now from Providence with the new details. Kim?
Well, Providence police have identified the victim as 23-year-old Jason Gonzalez, known by the nickname Heavy. Tonight, the neighborhood is shocked by his death. A broad daylight shooting claims the life of a Providence man.
Shortly after 2 o'clock, we had an adult, very tragically, we had an adult male shot and killed while inside his car.
Providence Police Commander Thomas Verdi says Jason Gonzalez was in his car on Donaldson Street when he was shot, the car crashing at the intersection with Admiral. The rear window of his silver Toyota sedan shattered.
We have no suspects, no description at this time, and this is all preliminary.
I'm shocked by it.
As police hunt for whoever pulled the trigger, neighbors in disbelief.
And then when I seen they had this all blocked off, and I'm like, oh my God, it happened in front of the house. And I'm like, and then when I seen Heavy's car go by, I go, no. And these people here said it was Heavy.
Heavy, the nickname used by Gonzalez, who we've learned pleaded guilty in 2014 to conspiracy and weapons-related charges for his role in a deadly Christmas Eve shooting in 2013. Police believe Gonzalez was there when 2 other men shot and killed Ryan Almeida at a housing development in Pawtucket. The AG's office saying Gonzalez and the others were members of the Chad Brown gang. Now, 5 years later, Gonzalez shot and killed.
What a shame.
Neighbor Betty Ann Verrocchio says he was a good kid, kind and quiet, now gone.
This guy is so sweet, so nice. I'm shocked by it, really.
And again, so far, no arrests have been made in this case. Anyone with information is urged to contact Providence Police. In Providence, I'm Kim Kalunian, Eyewitness News.
Police ID man shot, killed while driving in Providence. A broad daylight shooting claimed the life of a city man Tuesday afternoon. Providence police confirm Jason Heavy Gonzalez, 23, was traveling on Donaldson Street when he was hit by gunfire just after 2 p.m. According to police, the silver Toyota sedan Gonzalez was driving crashed at the intersection of Donaldson and Admiral Streets. A half-dozen police cruisers and crime scene tape ringed the car Tuesday afternoon as police investigated. The car's rear window was shattered. Neighbors were startled by the crime, which played out in broad daylight. When I seen all this, they had all this blocked off, and I'm like, oh my God, it happened in front of the house, said Betty Ann Verrocchio, who lives close to where the shooting happened. Then when I seen Heavy's car go by I was like, no. Verrocchio described the 23-year-old victim as sweet, quiet and nice, someone she believed was not the type to get involved in violence. She reminisced on nights he spent in her backyard by a fire pit, a way to stay off the streets, and pondered whether he was the wrong target. In 2013, police say a teenage Gonzalez was present for the Christmas Eve murder of Ryan Almeida. A year later he pleaded guilty to conspiracy and a firearm charge in connection with the murder. At the time of the crime, the Attorney General's office believed Gonzalez was a member of the Chad Brown Street gang. As of Tuesday night, police had no suspects in Gonzalez's murder.